I was sitting in my office, surrounded by screens and reports, when the message came. The phone flashed for a moment, and I unlocked the screen with a practiced movement. Emma, come at 6 o'clock today. We have something special for you. Love, Mom. Simple words, almost affectionate, if I didn't know what was behind them. Something inside me tightened. I reread the message 5 times, as if trying to fish out the hidden meaning from these lines. But I didn't have to guess, I knew. In our family, the word special has always been a veiled warning. It meant a meeting, a request, pressure. It's never just a surprise. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. I finished work early that day, not because I was in a hurry, but rather because I knew I needed time to adjust. I drove home, changed into jeans and a cashmere sweater, and threw on a gray coat. It was cool outside, the evening moisture lay on the windows, and the air smelled of autumn, green leaves, wet asphalt, and something else that always reminded me of my childhood. I drove along a familiar road, measuring the miles not by GPS, but by memory. Here's the gas station where Dad and I used to argue about which chocolate was better. Here's the cafe where Mom hosted her girls' breakfasts, which always ended with a call asking me to cover an unexpected credit card overspend. I parked in front of a 2-story house with neatly trimmed bushes and brass lanterns at the entrance. 4 years ago, I helped them make the initial payment, and despite all the assurances, the house was still in my parents' name. I didn't demand anything in return, because I once believed that's how a family should work. Warm light was pouring in from inside, silhouettes were flashing in the windows. I could make out laughter, music, and the discreet popping of glasses. Everything looked too thoughtful, too organized. This was already suspicious. I took a deep breath, went to the door, and rang the bell. Mom opened the door almost instantly, as if she was standing outside the door, waiting. She was all dressed up, beige dress, makeup with an emphasis on her eyes and lips, too bright lipstick, too wide smile. Emma. She cried out and pulled me into her arms. Happy birthday, my love. We are so glad to see you. I allowed myself a brief smile. Thanks, I replied, pulling back a little. What's the reason? You'll understand. She winked, and I felt something in me tense up. The living room was full of relatives I hadn't seen in years. Uncle Frank, who once asked me for $20,000 for medical bills, although later it turned out that the money had gone to the yacht's share. Aunt Susan, always chattering about family closeness, while filling out other people's tax deduction forms. And even Sheila is my cousin, whose only appearance always coincided with birthdays, big winnings, and financial crises. Happy birthday, Emma. They shouted in unison. I smiled and nodded. Wow. You're all here. How nice. Everything inside was shrinking. It wasn't a celebration. It was staged. Dad came up first, holding a glass in his hands. For you, he said with a smile, handing me a glass with a greenish liquid. Your favorite, green apple gin. I raised my eyebrows. I stopped drinking gin about 5 years ago. He stepped back, still smiling, but his eyes betrayed his irritation. Emma, come on, sit down, Mom called. We've got something for you. Really important. I followed her to the center of the room, where there was a small table and a wide gray sofa. There was a leather folder on the table, thin and neat, as if it was waiting for me. Mom motioned for me to sit down, and she sat next to me, folding her hands in her lap. Dad stood behind her, Tyler stood a little to the side, pretending to study the contents of the glass. We thought, Mom began, that you might be ready for the next stage. And Grandma. I left something for you. I reached for the folder. Her skin was cold to the touch. I opened it, and the title page appeared in front of me, Asset Redistribution Agreement. The Joanna Lawson Trust. My heart started pounding faster. I scrolled on. One sentence stopped my gaze. I, Emma Catherine Lawson, hereby waive all rights to the assets included in the Joanna Lawson Trust. I looked up. Mom was already nervously playing with the ring on her finger. Dad looked away. Tyler disappeared from my sight altogether. What is it? I asked, trying to keep my tone level. It's just a formality, Mom replied hurriedly. You know the tax and legal details. You don't lose anything anyway. I looked at the page again. Then at her. Then why didn't you tell me in advance? The room froze. Even the music seemed to have stopped. Everyone was waiting. Emma, Dad said. Don't make it a drama. It's just more convenient for everyone. You get everything anyway, it's simple, otherwise. I closed the folder and put it on my lap. Do you really think I didn't notice? That I won't guess why you're all here? Mom leaned closer. Don't be silly, honey. It's your birthday. We want you to feel how much we love you. I stood up slowly. The folder remained in my hand, as if its weight had become a symbol of all that was left unsaid. If this is love, then I'm afraid we have different dictionaries. But know this, I won't sign anything. And if you really wanted a surprise, you just got it. I looked around the room, looked at the faces. It was as if she suddenly saw everyone in a new way, the people she once called family. They were standing in a room full of light, with glasses and fake smiles. And at that moment, I felt that I was not among my family, but among strangers who came not to congratulate, but to take away. So, the game is just beginning. I didn't sit down right away. I stood there for a few seconds, as if I were hesitating to enter into a carefully constructed script that someone had written without my participation. Mom still had her hand on the back of the couch, as if guiding me to a place that I was supposed to occupy not by my own will, but by someone else's direction. Dad was standing a little to the side, already with a glass in his hand, and when our eyes met, he took a step forward and handed me the drink. Green apple gin, he said in the same voice he used to offer me candy after a parent-teacher meeting. Your favorite, right? I took the glass, but I didn't take a sip. I haven't had gin in 5 years, Dad. Have you forgotten? He was a little embarrassed, but immediately put on a smile as protection. Mom motioned for me to sit down. I did it with caution, like a person who sits down on a chair, not knowing if it will support his weight. The sofa was still the same, soft, with gray-blue stripes, with pillows that I had once chosen myself. Back then I still believed that this was my home too. There was a folder on a small side table, leather, with a soft texture, as if sewn by hand. She seemed inappropriately businesslike against the background of the cake, candles and ribbons. She didn't belong to the party. She was the center of the evening, and I felt it right away. I reached for her, the movement almost mechanical, as if my body understood that this was inevitable. The title page read, Asset Redistribution Agreement. The Joanna Lawson Trust. I ran my finger over the paper, feeling the coolness of the document that was supposed to be the key to the whole fortune, or to its loss. What is it? I asked without looking up. It's just a legal formality, Mom hurriedly replied, sitting down next to him. You know how complicated things have become with taxes since the last changes. We need to simplify the structure a bit. It's nothing serious. I turned the page. My eyes ran over the legal formulations. They were written in a language that I understood, the language of numbers, obligations, refusals. I read this every day. But among all the paragraphs, one phrase stood out like a knife's edge among the cutlery. I, Emma Catherine Lawson, hereby waive all rights and claims to the assets included in the Joanna Lawson Trust. I looked up again. Renunciation of inheritance? Mom pressed her lips together and smiled, as if I had asked a question to which the answer was obvious. It's for your own good, honey. Just a piece of paper. We're running everything together anyway, aren't we? I asked, and my voice was quieter, but there was a hint of metal in it. When did you explain this to me? Don't make a drama out of it, my father intervened. We're all here for you. You know, we've always thought of you first. I carefully closed the folder and placed it on my lap, as if it might burn. A room full of relatives suddenly seemed cramped, suffocated. The air became viscous. Everyone was looking at me, but no one dared to say more. Someone was sipping champagne, someone was pretending to be busy with the phone, someone was just avoiding eye contact. I stood up slowly, holding the folder in my hands. So you've decided that you're going to give me a birthday party so that I can sign a waiver of what my grandmother bequeathed to me? Without talking, without warning? Under the guise of formality? Mom stood up too, her face darkened. Emma, not here. You are welcome. It's a family evening. We don't want to quarrel. Just think about it. We don't have time for long right now. Then let's find some time, I replied calmly. If it concerns my grandmother's property, then I want to know who and why decided that it should go into the hands of someone other than me. My father put the glass on the windowsill. Your grandmother didn't want you to overload yourself. She thought we could manage it better. We have experience. It's just a relief. No pressure. I nodded. Gradually. And that's why you decided that the best time to discuss this is my birthday. With a cocktail in hand and a cake on the table? It seemed to us, Mom began, that if we approached this gently, you would make a decision without. Without what, Mom? Without awareness? No objections? She looked away. The room was filled with silence again, thick as water. I could feel the stares. Tyler, standing in the corner, studied the floor. Uncle Frank was whispering to Susan. And I was standing in the center of this family theater, not an actress, but a living barrier between their desires and reality. You knew I wouldn't sign it if I found out. That's why you hid the trap under the holiday wrapper. But I'm not the kind of girl who used to agree to everything for approval. Mom took a step toward me, her face tense, her voice trembling. If you don't sign, it will complicate everything. For everyone. It's just a signature. I smiled. Exactly. Just a signature. Which decides who manages the multi-million-dollar legacy. It's just a signature that conveys everything my grandmother left me to people who don't even consider it necessary to explain it to me. Mom pressed her lips together. Don't make a scene, Emma. I looked at her. Quietly. Straight. Then maybe it's time to put the play on pause and start a real conversation. Someone coughed in the room. Someone went into the kitchen. Someone remained standing as if frozen. And I was still standing in the middle of my family, holding a folder with the truth in it. And lies. And betrayal, neatly couched in legal language. And suddenly I realized, in this game, I was given the role of tacit consent. But I wasn't playing their script anymore. We were sitting across from each other in a quiet cafe on the Willamette riverfront. The reflection of headlights and lights from bridges flashed behind the glass. The river glittered in the reflection of the rare lanterns, like a spread of silver. The cafe was almost empty, just a couple of students in the corner and an elderly man with a book by the window. We chose a table in the back of the room, under an old lamp with a warm amber light that made everything around cozy, almost safe. Jade slowly sipped tea with bergamot, and I again, for the umpteenth time, flipped through the pages of those same documents. Here, look, I said softly, pushing the sheet towards her. This is not just a rejection. There's a power of attorney here. This is the right to manage accounts. And this item is asset allocation. 98% of the trust was to come under the full control of the parents. And I'm just a face for show. Jade picked up the sheet, peering at the lines, her fingers trembling slightly. She was silent, but I could see her eyes changing from bewilderment to anger. I knew she wouldn't say anything harsh until I said it myself. If I had signed this, I continued, almost in a whisper, would have voluntarily given them everything. Everything that my grandmother bequeathed to me personally. Without the right to withdraw, without the possibility of revision. That would be the point. Jade looked at me, her eyes serious, and there was something like pain in them. You knew that, didn't you? Inside yourself. When I saw the folder. I knew. I nodded. I knew, but I wanted to be wrong. I really wanted it to be a gift, a surprise, a sign of love. And not a way to trick a signature. She put down the documents. They knew you wouldn't agree to it if you found out in advance. That's why they set up this whole theater. I smiled weakly. Theater. That's too accurate a word. A week before my grandmother died, she sent me a letter, I said quietly, taking a folded envelope out of my bag. The paper has already faded slightly from the touch. I unfolded it and started reading aloud. If it gets difficult, talk to my lawyer, Jonathan Mays. I left you something. And if you ever feel like you're alone, know that you're not alone. I knew this day would come. Jade looked at me without interrupting. Her hand rested on top of mine. I'm going to Seattle tomorrow, I said. I need to know what she left. What she foresaw. I can't just guess anymore. Jonathan May's office was located in a brick building on the corner of Main Street and Jefferson Avenue. From the window there was a view of a park with oak trees, the leaves of which at this time of the year glowed with the whole palette of autumn, from gold to crimson. It smelled of leather, paper, and morning coffee. The woman at the reception wrote down my name with a kind smile and escorted me to the office. Jonathan turned out to be exactly what I imagined him to be according to my grandmother's stories. Tall, gray-haired, with a straight posture and a deep, calm voice. He stood up and held out his hand. Miss Lawson. Please accept my condolences. Your grandmother was an outstanding woman. Thanks. I sat down, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. She said she left something for me. You. Do you know what it's about? He nodded, went to the closet, opened one of the drawers, and took out a neatly wrapped envelope and a small black USB drive. This is a video. A personal appeal. And also the accompanying documents regarding the original trust. There are provisions in them that your family most likely does not know. Your grandmother has provided for everything. I picked up the flash drive, feeling its weight, as if there was not just a memory inside, but a part of my grandmother herself. We connected the device to the laptop. A familiar face appeared on the screen. Grandma was sitting in her armchair by the window, wearing a blue cardigan, with a book on her lap. Her eyes, despite their age, were lively and penetrating. If you're watching this, it means everything went as I feared, she began. Emma, honey. You've always been honest. The only one who didn't ask or demand. That's why I want to protect you. I sat holding my breath, feeling hot tears coming to my eyes, but I didn't blink. I had to finish watching. I saw how your mother used your family. How your father hid his debts under the guise of helping. I'm not blind. And I'm not going to let what I've been collecting all my life become their toy. There is an item in the trust that is activated if you sign a waiver under duress. In this case, all property is automatically transferred to charitable foundations. Every last cent. I looked at Jonathan. He nodded silently, confirming, yes, it really is. Grandma continued. But if you decide to stay true to yourself, if you choose yourself, you will get everything. Not because of the money. It's because you deserve it. The screen went blank. I just sat there for a few seconds, not moving. It was as if Grandma was here. It was as if her voice was still in the air. "Can I get a copy?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "Of course," Jonathan replied. "Moreover, we have another video. For the family." She asked him to show it only if the situation got out of control. I took the flash drive and the documents. The papers were carefully drafted, signed, and stamped. And every point was clear, direct, and honest. Grandma didn't leave a single loophole. When I left the office, it was already raining outside. Drops trickled down the glass, down the coat, down the cheeks. But I didn't feel the cold. I felt clear. And, for the first time in a long time, a foothold. Now I had a plan. And now I had the floor. I knew that this meeting would be a theater, but this time it was the theater of my idea, my script, my finale. The invitation was extremely simple, almost casual. I wrote, "Let's meet at my place tomorrow. At 5. I think it's time to settle things calmly." 10 minutes later, a reply came from my mother. "Of course, honey. We knew you'd think it over. See you later." I haven't read it twice. I didn't have to. She was sure she had one. The next morning, I did a general cleaning. Not because of the guests. I just wanted the space to be absolutely mine. I moved the chair closer to the wall, freed up the white surface for the screen, and put the old projector I borrowed from the office on the shelf. On the coffee table were a USB flash drive and a remote control, modest, inconspicuous objects that, however, contained all the power I had gathered over the years. I left a kettle of boiling water and cups in the kitchen. No wine, no desserts. Nothing to remind me of the holidays. Today is no reason to smile. The bell rang at 5 o'clock sharp. I felt my chest constrict, as if my heart had paused before beating. I went to the door, opened it, and there they were. Mom is in a cream-colored dress, perfectly ironed. Her face is restrainedly pleased. Her lips are stretched into a polite smile. Dad is wearing a dark blue suit and a cherry-colored tie, his lucky one. And Tyler, hands in his pockets, eyes averted, as if he still hoped to remain unnoticed. "Where's Emma?" Mom asked, coming in first. Her voice sounded stern, with the tone she usually used when she wanted to remind who was really in charge of the situation here. "Here," I said, emerging from the kitchen with a cup of tea. "Come on in. Have a seat." They went inside. Mom first, then Dad, followed by Tyler, who hesitated in the doorway. I pointed to the couch. Silently. Mom sat down, folding her hands in her lap. Dad sat next to me, crossing his legs. Tyler remained standing, then sank into a chair by the window. I went to the shelf, inserted the flash drive into the projector and turned to them. "Before we start talking, I want you to see something." "Emma," Mom began, "I'm sure we can." "I'll just ask you to look," I interrupted. "It will only take a few minutes." I pressed the remote control. The wall was colored with a soft light. A silhouette stepped out of the darkness. Grandma Joanna was sitting in her favorite armchair, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed directly into the camera. His face is stern, but there is a familiar warmth in his features. "If you're watching this, it means my granddaughter Emma didn't sign the document you were trying to plant on her," she said calmly. "Which means everything is going exactly as I predicted." Mom froze. Dad leaned forward a little, his fingers curled on the armrest. Tyler raised his head. "I left everything to Emma. And only to her. Not because she's my favorite. I don't have any favorites. It's because she's the only one who has never asked, manipulated, or belittled me. I saw how you treated her. As requested, pressured, blackmailed. And I will not allow my will to be destroyed by greed." I saw Mom's face turn pale and her eyes narrow. Dad was no longer trying to hide his excitement. He wanted to say something, but stopped when his grandmother's voice continued. My trust cannot be changed. And if any of you try to pressure, convince, or force Emma to give up her inheritance, all of her assets, I emphasize, all of them, will be redirected to 4 charities that I personally chose. Without the possibility of appeal. No refund. I turned off the projector. For a moment, there was a ringing silence in the room. Just the ticking of the kitchen clock and the sound of breathing. What was that? Mom whispered. This. It's impossible. She had no right. I said, looking into her eyes. And everything is documented. Signed. Certified. Fixed. Dad jumped up. You don't understand what this is going to lead to. If the item is activated, we will lose everything. I remained standing. If you try to continue the pressure, yes. You'll lose everything. Because Grandma knew what you were capable of. And she put up a defense. Me. Mom exhaled heavily. She wasn't trying to smile anymore. Why are you doing this, Emma? We are your family. I moved closer, stopping in the center of the room. I'm not doing this. I'm defending myself. What you call family has been synonymous with control, debt, and lies for too long. Grandma gave me a tool. And I decided that was enough. No more underground games. No more surprises tailored to your convenience. Tyler was looking at me with an expression that was a mixture of fright and maybe respect. He didn't say anything. And maybe that's what he said the most. From now on, I continued, any actions regarding this trust, any attempts to influence me, will be recorded. One wrong step and half of the inheritance will be gone forever. You knew the rules. Now you've heard the consequences. Dad opened his mouth to protest, but fell silent. I looked at them not with anger, not with vindictiveness, but with clarity. It wasn't a war. It was setting boundaries. I don't want revenge, I said softly. I want justice. And now everything will be my way. Mom stood up. Slowly, carefully, as if trying not to betray how her knees were shaking. She picked up her purse and looked at me. You'll understand everything. Over time. Maybe, I nodded. But not today. They're gone. One by one. They left behind a void that, unexpectedly, wasn't scary. She was liberating. I was left in my apartment, with the projector turned off, with the wall on which the voice of someone who knew the truth before me had just sounded. And I suddenly realized that it wasn't just a victory. That was the beginning. My new game. My rules. My life. The cafe stood on the corner of a familiar street, as warm and sleepy as in my childhood memories. The old brick facade, the faded neon sign, the maple spoon, the smell of fresh waffles and syrup mixed with the aroma of strong filtered coffee, everything was the same as 20 years ago, when my father took me here on Sundays after church. We sat at a table by the window, and I always ordered pancakes with strawberries and whipped cream, and he ordered scrambled eggs and bacon, saying that, you can't start the day with sugar if you want to win. Back then, it seemed to me that he knew the answers to everything. Now I knew that he had come up with many of the answers himself. I arrived at the meeting 10 minutes early. I wanted to have time to breathe in the air of this place and get rid of the trembling in my fingers. The waitress recognized me, smiled like an old acquaintance, and brought me a cup of coffee without waiting for an order. She knew that I always take it black. I nodded gratefully and put the folder in front of me. It was brown, thick, and the corners were a little wrinkled from holding it all the way from Portland. Everything was inside: printouts, statements, transactions, dates, account numbers. The truth is neatly sorted into sections. and I wasn't afraid to show it anymore. My father entered the cafe at the 13th minute. He still held himself confidently, swaying slightly as he walked, as if in a hurry, but did not allow himself to show it. He wore a gray raincoat, a blue scarf, and his hair was neatly combed back. He looked around the room, found me with his eyes, and walked straight to me. "Emma," he said with a slight smile as he approached. "The traffic jams were terrible." "It's okay," I replied calmly. "Have a seat." He sat down across from her, hung his coat over the back of a chair, and motioned to the waitress, ordering coffee. He was silent for a few seconds, looking around the table, then looked up at me. "I'm glad you decided to talk." I didn't answer. She just unfolded the folder and placed it in the center of the table. "What's that?" "The answer to your question," I said. "Or rather, the one you haven't asked yet." He picked up the first page and frowned. It was an extract from my student credit card. I ran my finger along the line. January 2016, Springfield Medical Center. The amount is $4,200. "Do you remember when you and Mom called and said that Tyler needed surgery urgently?" He blinked, put the paper back. "It was all true," he said. "No," I replied. "Because 2 days later, this money was used to pay for a Range Rover issued to my mother in Miami. I have a copy of the translation." He paused. His fingers curled into a lock, and I noticed the corner of his mouth twitch, as if he wanted to say something but didn't know where to begin. "I found other records. Credit cards issued in my name. Your gambling debts disguised as tax expenses. The money that I allegedly lent to my mom for therapy, and which went to spa treatments in Arizona. Are you saying that it was all for the family?" He lowered his eyes. For a second, it seemed to me that he had become smaller, as if he had lost some of his height when his confidence disappeared. "Emma, you don't understand. We were in a difficult situation. We thought you could handle it. You've always done well." I put my palm on the table, slowly, carefully, but firmly. "That's the problem. You thought I could handle it. That you can use me over and over again as a shield against your own consequences. But it doesn't work anymore." He met my gaze. There was fear in his eyes, not the kind that comes from threats, but the kind that comes with the realization that control is lost. "You want to take everything back now, don't you?" he asked. "No," I replied. "I don't want to take it. I want you to stay away. You and Mom. No calls with requests, no new credit cards, no emergencies. That's it. That's the end of it." He slowly leaned back in his chair. It was raining slowly outside the window. Drops trickled down the glass, as if a clock was counting down the seconds to a new chapter. "And if we disagree?" I looked at him. "Do you remember the clause in Grandma's trust?" I said. "If I sign something under duress or if an attempt of legal pressure is initiated, half of the assets will immediately go to charitable foundations. Grandma has provided for everything. And I'm ready to activate it." He turned pale. "This is revenge, isn't it?" I shook my head. "This is protection. And for the first time, fair terms." He was silent for a few moments, then he said softly, "And if we change? If we try another way? Then you can prove it. But not with my money. Not on my responsibility. And not through manipulation." I got up, gathered up the documents, and carefully put them back in the folder. "Emma," he began. I looked at him and, for the first time in years, I didn't feel pity, pain, or guilt. "I'm not a child who can be coaxed with sweet words," I said. "You're no longer the one who takes me to pancakes and tells me how to live. From now on, there are only borders. Just me and my choice." I left the cafe without looking back. The air was damp and cool, and the sky was overcast, but I walked confidently. It was like shedding an old skin. I didn't get an agreement today. I made the rules. It was only now that I realized how much words meant, not in a scream, but in clarity. I arrived at Jonathan May's office 15 minutes earlier than planned. It was a cool and clear morning, with a light haze over the streets of Seattle. There was a silence in the air before the storm, that special, motionless clarity that only happens when everything is prepared down to the smallest detail. I didn't have to repeat the script to myself. He was in my blood. In every cell. Every step is on the cold marble floor of the reception area. Jonathan greeted me with a restrained nod. "It's all set, Miss Lawson. The room is prepared. The documents are signed, the materials are laid out. And the video is uploaded." I answered him with a slight movement of my head and went into the conference room. The room was spacious, with glass walls overlooking the city skyline. In the center was a long table made of dark walnut, surrounded by 8 chairs, each exactly in its place. There was a screen at the end of the room, still immersed in black expectation. Daylight was reflected on its surface, and it seemed as if someone's shadow was already lurking there. I sat down on a chair, stretched out my arms in front of me, put my palms on the cool wood and exhaled. It wasn't excitement. It was the tension of an archer who had already pulled the bowstring and was waiting for the moment of the shot. At 9 o'clock sharp, the door opened. Mom came in first. There was something prickly in her gaze, a mask of confidence slightly touched by fatigue. Her father walked behind her, his back straight, with an expression of ostentatious importance. At the end, Tyler appeared, shoulders hunched, eyes on the floor. He wasn't trying to hide what he was feeling. He's never been good at it. They sat down as if it were an ordinary business meeting. Dad put the phone next to him, as always. Mom took out a notebook in which she never wrote anything down. I was sitting across from them, completely calm. "Thanks for coming," I said flatly. "There's something we should all see. And hear it." "I hope we have a constructive conversation today," my mother remarked, looking at me over the top of her glasses. The last meeting was overly emotional. I turned on the projector. No foreplay. Grandma appeared on the screen. The very recording that she asked to be shown only in case of emergency. "Ellen. Richard. Tyler," she began. "If you're watching this, it means you were trying to circumvent my will. I knew you would do it. That's why I planned everything in advance." Mom froze, her fingers gripping the pen so tightly that it creaked. Dad slowly leaned forward. Tyler raised his head for the first time. "I didn't just leave Emma a personal legacy," Grandma continued. "I also gave her a controlling stake in Langston and Hartley, the company that I founded with William. Emma is my successor. She knows the value of money, but more importantly, she knows the value of trust." The frames on the screen changed, a document in which it was clearly stated, 52% of the shares now belong to me. Certified signatures. Seals. A legal formulation that leaves no room for manipulation. "It's impossible," Dad whispered. "She couldn't," I said, pushing the originals toward him. "And she did. You both knew that she wanted to see a person at the head of the company who could not only talk about values, but also act on them." He stared at the documents. Mom sat motionless, like a stone figure. Only her lips were trembling slightly. "I'm the new CEO," I said. "Here is the resignation letter that you must sign. Voluntarily. Or we will file a complaint with the Securities Commission, with an attachment of all financial violations that have been recorded over the past 5 years." I pushed another folder towards them, a thick one with statements, receipts, and transaction diagrams. Jonathan came over and put a cover letter next to it, a formal notification of the start of the inspection, in case of refusal. The father tried to get up, but sat down again. His face turned pale, and there was something between despair and confusion in his eyes. "You wouldn't do that," he breathed. "It will destroy everything. It will make us look ridiculous." "I didn't ruin it," I replied. "I'm just protecting what Grandma built. What you wanted to turn into your personal account." He looked at me for a long time, then picked up a pen. His signature was fast, nervous, with a sharp pressure. He put down his pen and pushed away from the table. "Oh. He's gone." I turned to my mom. "Will you sign it?" She didn't answer. She just got up, slowly, silently, picked up her purse and left the room. Tyler stayed seated. He looked at me as if he had never seen me before. There was no hatred or resentment in his gaze, just amazement. And, perhaps, a shadow of respect. When the door closed behind the last of them, I was left alone in the room. The conference room was still flooded with soft light, and the city spread out beyond the windows. Everything was in place. And me too. I got up, went to the window, put my palms on the glass. No triumph, no jubilation. Only inner silence. It wasn't a victory. It was freedom. Grandma wanted me to get up. For me to lead. Now I was exactly the person she was raising. And I knew it was just beginning. The first morning in the new office began with the fact that I opened the blinds and let in the light. The sky over Seattle was clear in spring, with thin streaks of clouds that looked like the lines of a letter that hadn't been written yet. From the height of the 20th floor, the city seemed quieter. People were almost invisible, only cars crawled through the streets like ants, taking with them haste, anxiety, and goals. But here, in this room, everything was new. Not only the furniture, not only the documents in the drawers. I was the new one. The office of the CEO of Langston and Hartley has always seemed distant, almost mythical to me. His father used to reign in it. His voice, his photographs, his cologne scent soaked into the leather chairs. Now the chairs have been upholstered. Instead of his portrait, there is a painting on the wall by Grandma Joanna, a forest path illuminated by the last light of day, with warm ochre strokes, as if even at dusk she believed in clarity. I hung it up myself on the first day. Without ceremony. I just took a hammer and a nail and hung it up as a sign. Her spirit is here now, her voice. And my determination. Working days were busy, intense, and sometimes exhausting. But I didn't feel like a cog anymore. I didn't just sign papers and make decisions. I led. And I changed course. Part of the profits now went to finance the Joanna Lawson Foundation, an initiative that was born not from a business plan, but from a wound that I learned to heal not with money, but with action. The foundation has become a home for those who, like me, have experienced financial exploitation in their family. Teenagers, young adults, students, and older women all came with the same eyes, tired, scared, and lost. But over time, confidence appeared in those eyes. And I knew Grandma would approve. We have created financial literacy programs, psychological support, and legal advice. And most importantly, we created an environment where no one called you ungrateful just because you refused to be a purse for other people's mistakes. One evening, when the sun had already hidden behind the towers, and only I was left in the office, I received a message. It was from Mom. "Emma. We need to talk. Dad just got out of the hospital. Please." I stared at the screen for a long time. The words were restrained, even, as if someone had composed them very carefully, afraid to break a fine line. And yet there was something real about them. Or so I just wanted to think. I replied half an hour later, Friday. 1500 hours, my office. No scraping. No promises. Just an opportunity. If she wants to, she will come. At the appointed time, the door opened and they entered. Mom is still neat, in a gray suit, which may have been chosen for a reason. No brightness, no pretension. Dad looked different. He's aged. Not only the face, but also the posture, movements, and gaze. He no longer had the power that he wore like a jacket. There was only fatigue in it. "Thank you for agreeing to see us," Mom began, sitting down. "We didn't come to ask. We came, understand where we stand." I nodded. There were already 2 envelopes on the table. I pushed them towards them. "This is a list of clinics. Recovery programs. Centers dealing with gambling addictions and compulsive spending. There are telephones, coordinators, and available forms of payment. If you want to start with something, start with honesty." Mom opened the envelope, her eyes darting over the lines. Dad was looking right at me. "Do you think we're monsters?" "What is it?" he asked softly. "No," I replied. "I think you are people who have lived too long thinking that you can build a family based on guilt. And I was a part of it. Long. But I won't do it anymore." They sat in silence. I didn't feel like I was winning. I didn't feel angry. Just clarity. I wasn't their enemy. But I was no longer their hostage either. "We can do it somehow." "Start over?" Mom asked cautiously. "I'm not closing the doors," I said. "But I don't open them wide either. Now everything will be different. Not on terms of dependency, but on terms of respect." When they left, I stared at their silhouettes disappearing into the hallway for a long time. And she wasn't in pain. I experienced silence. That rare, dense silence that comes when you're not playing for the first time, not defending yourself, not making excuses. You just live. I went back to my desk, turned on the lamp, and looked at Grandma's painting again. The light of the passing day seemed to call forward, deeper into the path. And I knew that every step was mine now. Every choice is the same. I wasn't just an heiress. I became myself. And this was my new chapter. The conference room in downtown Denver was spacious, with high ceilings and glass walls through which the soft light of the sunset sky streamed. The smell of coffee and a light scent of fresh paper hung in the air, the smell of a new beginning, new ideas, fresh voices. I was standing backstage, my fingers touching the cover of a notebook in which, after all, I hadn't made a single entry. I didn't need any more hints. My story lived in me, breathed in me, moved through me. Not as a wound, but as a force. The organizers called my name. The applause came almost instantly, and I walked out into the spotlight, feeling no fear. Just steady, deep breathing. Only confidence. There were young people in the front row, some with notebooks, some with laptops, some with an open heart. And I noticed Tyler among them. He sat quietly, head slightly bowed, with an expression of concentration. Our eyes met, and he nodded. A little bit. Almost imperceptibly. But I realized he could hear. He's ready. I went to the microphone, paused for a second, and started. My name is Emma Lawson. And perhaps the most important thing I want to tell you today is that you are not selfish if you choose yourself. It doesn't make you a bad person that you set boundaries. It makes you real. The hall was silent. I felt the attention of each of them, not because I was speaking loudly, but because I was speaking honestly. I had been successful for many years. I managed the finances, I helped the family, I was the one who always copes. But there was another world behind that facade. A world of pleading night calls, a world of guilt disguised as love. A world where I paid not only with money, but with my time, my freedom, and my self-worth. I paused. There was no sound in the hall. One day I realized that if I continue, I will lose myself. And then I made a choice. Not easy. Not approved by everyone. But mine. I said, that's enough. I refused to be a bank. I stopped being comfortable. I chose to be alive. In the corners of the hall, someone nodded cautiously, someone closed his eyes, someone wrote down my words. But most of all, I saw understanding. Recognition. Today I run an investment company. I founded a foundation that helps people who have experienced the same thing as me. I no longer hide behind polite smiles. I no longer agree to be used in exchange for the appearance of love. I am me. And that's enough. I finished. The applause was not loud at first, but then it began to grow, gaining strength, uniting the hall into one whole. I left the stage with a slight smile. Not out of pride. From inner peace. From the truth. I live in Capitol Hill, in a modest apartment overlooking the roof of a bookstore. I drink coffee in the morning, watching the city wake up. I have a photo frame on the kitchen shelf with me, Jade, and the foundation team, taken on the opening day of our first branch in Vermont. We're all laughing, someone in a sweater, someone with a hand raised in a victory gesture. It wasn't a perfect photo. It was alive. There are novels on the bookshelf that I never had time to read in my youth. Now I have time for that. Above the desk is a card with the inscription, "Love does not require self-sacrifice." One of the girls who went through the foundation's program gave it to me. Her story was similar to mine. Only she was ready to hear the truth before I was. The mirror in the hallway reflects me in the morning. Without a mask. Without tension. I look at myself, and for the first time I smile, not out of politeness, not because it's necessary, but because I see, I am. I'm Emma. Not a helper, not a daughter, not an eternal savior. Just a man who chose himself. And that doesn't make me cruel. It makes me honest. I recently received a postcard from Tyler. He texted, "Thank you for being stronger than I was back then. Now I understand that you didn't leave us. You were saving yourself." I didn't cry when I read it. I nodded. Gradually. Deep. Because I knew that sometimes understanding doesn't come at the right time, but it heals anyway. Sometimes I think, what would Grandma say if she saw me now? And then I remember, she already knew. She didn't just believe in me. She believed that I would learn to believe in myself. Her path in the painting leads to the forest. But now I know that there is a light beyond the forest. And if you're reading these lines and you feel like you're drowning, know this: you don't have to pay for someone else's greed. One should not lose oneself for the sake of those who do not know how to love unconditionally. You have the right to say no. And say yes to yourself. This is not selfishness. It's courage. I'm Emma Lawson. And I am me.